When you live in New York, you kind of like forget what is the significance of green spaces. I just retired from New York City Transit Authority, so this is my detox. Now I have a garden where I can just come at any time. I'm a community chef, I'm a real chef, and I'm a gardener, so I have something to share. For me, it's an opportunity to educate my community about eating fresh, seasonal, local, and trying to fight all the diet-related diseases that are affecting our community. I understand the significance of everything surrounding us right here, and I want us to all experience it. You know, it's not all about me, it's about us.
Madrid no fue siempre una gran metrópoli. Podemos decir que el paisaje histórico de Madrid es un paisaje agrícola. La gran expansión de Madrid se produce a mediados del siglo XX. Casi en 20 años Madrid llega a duplicar su población. A partir de ese momento, el territorio que rodea Madrid se transforma completamente y empieza a albergar todas las instalaciones, todos los equipamientos que necesita una gran ciudad. El problema que tenemos ahora mismo es un problema de suelos muy alterados y muy degradados, donde ha habido muchísimos vertidos, con lo cual lo que tiene que hacer el proyecto del bosque metropolitano es regenerar todos estos suelos. El proyecto de bosque metropolitano va a conseguir generar un anillo verde de 75 kilómetros con 35.000 hectáreas forestales. El 80% ya existe, pero vamos a intervenir en 4.000 hectáreas durante 10 años. Esto va a suponer incrementar en 1 millón de árboles la cantidad que ahora mismo tenemos en Madrid. Los beneficios de las infraestructuras verdes son indudables para el medio ambiente. Reducimos la contaminación, mejoramos la calidad del aire, de tal manera que estamos aproximando la naturaleza a la ciudad de Madrid. Este último año de la pandemia nos ha hecho todavía ser más conscientes de la necesidad que tenemos del arbolado, del medio ambiente que nos rodea. Bueno, para nosotros esta década va a ser crucial para poder desarrollar esta gran infraestructura verde para Madrid. Pero es como ya la última oportunidad. Si no aprovechamos este momento, lo habremos perdido y Madrid se quedará sin anillo verde.
a very happy World Environment Day. We're here today with a marvelous, diverse panel to discuss generation restoration, reimagining and recreating at industries, businesses, governments, and individuals on the increasingly urgent need to restore Earth's ecosystem and how technology can play a role at large. Introducing our esteemed panelists for today, we have Mr. Satya Tripathi, Secretary
This
General
meeting is being recorded.
for a Sustainable Planet, also the Chancellor of Kalinga Institute of Social Sciences, former United Nations Assistant General Secretary, Head of New York office at UN Environment. Good morning to you, Mr. Tripathi, since you're joining us from New York.
Good morning.
We have Dr. Ajay Garg, Senior Director at Ministry of Electronics and Information Technology. Happy to have you here, sir, today.
Hello, I'm fine. Thank you, Payal, and wish everyone a happy World Environment Day. And we see a much happier environment.
We have Gayatri Chabria, Trustee Mukul Foundation and Marketing and Strategy at Finolex Industries. Hello, Gayatri.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for having me here today. Truly looking forward to today's talk. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Srijan Pal Singh, founder and CEO of Dr. APJ Abdul Kalam Center. Thank you, Srijan, for joining us today.
Thank you, Payal, and I'm very happy that you're organizing this very important event. And today is the World Environment Day, and we are already seeing the impact of the human action on the environment and the environment's action on humans. So I'm very happy to be sharing my thoughts and concerns and on this very important topic. So, and I have my greetings to all my fellow panelists and also to all those people who are joining us and listening to us. Your opinion does matter.
Thank you. Thank you, Srijan. Let us kickstart the panel with everyone's initial thoughts on what are the key concepts for creating and implementing a shared vision on ecosystem restoration. So let us begin with Mr. Tripathi, who's had 2 to 3 decades with the United Nations and UNEP. Mr. Tripathi.
Thank you, Payal, and greetings, everyone. Very happy World Environment Day. While we wish each other a happy World Environment Day, the situation is not very happy. And of course, the thing that comes quickly to mind is COVID. Let us spare a thought for all those that have suffered immensely. Sometimes it's very easy to apportion blame to but the fact remains that that's all short term. The long-term reason for why we are here is because we have destroyed our ecosystems. While I was still with UNEP until a few weeks ago, we did a study with the International Livestock Research Institute, a study on zoonotic diseases. And what we found was quite revealing that in the last few decades, 75% of the new diseases have been zoonotic diseases, where pathogens have jumped from animals to humans. So it is not by accident that we are here today. It is by design. It is just that we don't know we were the designers of our own tragedy. And that's telling, and that's also a cautionary tale for all of us in this conversation today, that we really need to see COVID-19 as a problem that will keep reoccurring with alarming frequency in different shapes and forms. We will certainly, but this will not be our last unless we really bring back our ecosystems. I'm particularly pleased to be part of this conversation because when I had first arrived 3 years ago in my previous role at UNEP to head the New York office of UN Environment, the first meeting I had was with the minister from El Salvador, who was quite a champion. And El Salvador is the country that actually sponsored the General Assembly resolution for the decade on ecosystem restoration. So, um, and this was one of the very rare resolutions that made its way through the General Assembly at very well of the member nations of the UN, that when you have something really meaningful and something as pressing as the state of our ecosystems globally, countries do come together and agree on a way forward. And that's how the General Assembly passed the resolution in 2019, rather early 2019. And we are starting today the UN Decade on Ecosystem Restoration that my former colleagues at the UNEP have worked very hard, along with colleagues at the Food and Agricultural Organization. These are the two agencies that have been given the responsibility by the General Assembly to help implement, of course, working with all of us, the stakeholders across the planet. The second thing I wanted to point out was that we exist in a very fine balance. The world has about 8 million species. We are just one of them. So while it perhaps serves our short-term needs to be arrogant and to be blind in believing that the planet exists for us, the fact remains that it isn't. It wasn't too long ago in a cosmic time scale that humans didn't even exist on the planet. We didn't even matter in the overall scheme of things. Think of the dinosaurs and everybody else that has come before us and gone without a trace. So that is what we really need to keep in mind. But the good thing about humans is that we are very ingenious. We are capable of finding new technology, new ideas, new concepts that can be implemented at system scale. In the context of India, if you told me, somebody who's been in this space for a while, 7 years ago, that the government is coming up with a scheme where they're going to provide clean cooking fuel, the Ujjwala scheme I'm referring to, that they would get it to the homes of more than 80 million people, 80 million families, I would have laughed it off. Okay, I've heard them before. But here we are, they're beyond 83 million families now, and the Union Budget 2021 has assigned resources for another 10 million families. Now, if you ever grew up in a village and with your mothers and sisters, because that's what falls on women, unfortunately, in the developing world, who walk miles and miles to fetch pieces of wood so that everybody can survive, then you would know what difference it makes. So it is possible, actually, to work at system scale and change things. But then we can certainly solve this tremendous challenge that confronts us today. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Tripathi. And I completely agree with COVID adding to the wrath of our critical biodiversity and restoration, with the number one point being the waste that has been generated from the entire medical waste that we're talking about. So BMW biodegradable medical waste being one. However, I would now bring Srijan Pal Singh, who's actively working not only for environment but has been active with his initiative called COVID Buddy to help the citizens around with not only critical essentials for COVID, medical health, but also actively policy and reforms when we talk about environment. So yeah, Srijan, to you, please.
Thank you, Payal. Yeah. So I think Mr. Tripathi is right, and we are suffering partly because of two reasons, actually. One is that the chaotic transition, the leap into of viruses which occur in nature into other mammals jumping into humans, that is there. But the COVID-19 crisis also shows something new, and that is the adventure of humankind to start meddling with nature at the level of life itself, and how wrong we can get that. Now, I don't know whether you believe in this or not, whether we are still sort of gathering the evidence, but it seems to indicate, with not a 100% surety, but a fair degree of surety, that the coronavirus, the novel coronavirus, the nCoV-2, was not even made in nature. Well, it happened in nature in 2013 perhaps, but it was made in a lab. And that is a very popular theory. We don't have a conclusive evidence on it, but it seems man was playing with the very forces of life itself. And that is an astounding level of arrogance when we start playing with nature, hoping to control it in a complete form. And that has backfired on us, it seems. And that is a warning on two fronts. Number one is that you see the planet, you don't save the planet. You save the planet for yourself. The planet been here for billion years, 2 million years. The planet has seen life for 4 billion years, or 3 billion years at least, when the first forms of cellular biology came into being, called prokaryotes. The prokaryotes began about 3 billion years ago, and we are here for a million or so. The planet will live, even if there is too much carbon dioxide, the planet will live. It has no problem. It will not. It's our problem. So I think number one to realize that the Earth, the planet, nature in general, are bigger than us. We are controlled by nature. We do not control nature at all. In a short run of 200 years or 150 years industrialization, we might think, okay, we can shoot up the aircrafts and all your industry, most of it at least, is shut down in no time. So nature is far more powerful than what we realize it is, number one. Number two, playing with nature can really backfire. And we are seeing this in coronavirus. We've seen this in many other places. But this seems to be the epitome for us to realize that if we meddle with nature, things can go awfully wrong. It can go to an event which could be, this COVID-19 is not a species-threatening event, but it could be one. We could lead to one. So something which are called mass extinction events is something which we might end up creating if we play with nature. Now, coming back to the topic of Environment Day, a few things have to be realized. Is we need to be very objective in terms of where we are going wrong. I'll give you an example of it. Everybody talks about drinking water, or water which non-sea water, the sweet water. Now we say that you plug your taps, there should be no leakage and all. That's great. There's nothing wrong in it. But 83% of river water, or fresh water rather, goes into agriculture. Nobody talks about it. Unless you have that perspective that where is the pollution? Perspective in numbers, I think a lot of people have significant amount of confusion. No, we think that this is the culprit, and the culprit is somewhere else. Now, because I also work with policy and in a way politics as well, there's a lot of diversion. So there'll always be a straw man which is created and said, this is the one which is the problematic, now work on it. But unless people get a clarity, and that's why it's important to have a complete knowledge in terms of what exactly is happening and who's doing what. I've written several books on it where we can do that. And third thing I believe is that technology and environment water from nature, when technology can also be a collaborator with nature. Simple things like nanotechnology can go long way in healing environment. You could have buildings which can buildings consume about 40% of energy. You could have buildings which would consume 20% of energy. That technology exists even today. As we speak, it exists. There are wonderful technologies which have, leaps and bounds we have grown in terms of solar power, in terms of all kinds of, naturally regenerating power sources, which we can invest into. Today, about 2 months ago, actually, we sent a mission to Mars. And that mission is essentially the beginning of changing Martian environment to make it suitable for humans. And hence we have the technology today to shape the environment in a positive way on another planet. And it's almost ironical that while we are shaping the environment, the atmosphere, creating abundance of water, abundance of oxygen on another planet, we are struggling to keep what we got. Now, before I conclude, sometimes I imagine myself to be the first generation of people who go to Mars. And those people, and I've written a fiction on it, so it's something very close to me. Those generation of first Martian dwellers would find, would hunt for water, like we hunt for gold or we hunt for oil. Would perhaps even, there'll be conflicts on water. That might actually happen on Earth as well. Those Martian generations would not be able to live over the ground. They have to live underground because there is radiation on Mars. In Earth, it is protected because of the magnetic protection which we have. The magnetic poles of the Earth protect us. Doesn't happen on Mars. Those people would struggle for oxygen. They will probably have to carry some form of oxygen. It will feel lighter because the gravity is lighter. But at the same time, they'll have to cover themselves with some form of oxygen. And those Martian people, those humans who would live on Mars, would look back at Earth and this blue dot, and Earth looks quite decently blue if you look from Mars. And they would look at Earth and say, there's abundant water here, or there was abundant water if you finish it off. There were plants going around, there were jungles there, and here we are struggling and we could not even grow a plant, and we don't have oxygen, we don't have water. And they would see the true value of what nature gifted us. And I hope that by that day, when that day comes, we do realize and we do preserve what we have got on this planet. And we value what nature's gifts are. And technology, with the right intent, can work to make the environment better for our future generations and even for our generations. That's my message. Thank you.
Thank you, Srijan. Very enlightening thoughts there. Bringing Dr. Garg in. So fortunately, technological progress is so fast that greater involvement of environmental technologies will be massively used. Now, Dr. Garg, could you please, enlighten us with how do you think it come to play implementing a shared vision on ecosystem restoration? Sir, you're on mute. Dr. Garg, mute.
Thank you, Payal. Let me first compliment my earlier two speakers, Professor Tripathi and Mr. Singh. Amazing talks and amazing perspectives that they gave, and it makes me actually think twice what more can I speak about the very in today's date I fully agree with the two earlier speakers that nature and environment, including human, have never been challenged so much as has been challenged in the last 1.5 years or 18 months to 20 months that has happened in the last 20 months. The balance between the nature and the existence of mankind has never been questioned prior to this, no matter how much of exploitation we did with the nature of the environment prior to this. And we never realized that what damage we are doing to the environment. Now, I'm not an environmentalist, so let me talk about technology. We also never realized that how have we played wrongly with the technology in the past and what few things we can do correctly when we are talking about future tech. If in the 19th century, nuclear technology was a path-breaking discovery or an invention, and a path-breaking discovery around fission, and a lot of devices and technologies that were built were path-breaking and could have changed the way we think about energy today. But unfortunately, because there was no rulemaking done at that time, the nuclear technology was never able to be exploited to the potential that it had. And rather we used it to destroy the environment, and we created systems to either like Hiroshima, Nagasaki during the war times, or the Chernobyl during the peace times. So it was basically because the world did not come together to actually understand that how the technology can be used productively in the future. Fortunately or unfortunately, the artificial intelligence has a similar potential either to destroy or create a new world that looks into many aspects of data to create a better world for us tomorrow. We are in the process either from the global platform on AI, the ethical practices in AI being discussed in the G7, G20, and even in the UN. So what I mean to say is that prior to AI becoming a big potential technology to actually change the mankind, we need to think about that. We need to have a marking rule that it does not exploit the environment. It does not misuse the data, rather it uses the data productively and create what we call as a cyclic economy or a cyclic nature of that the nature has actually been. Because let's understand, once we never would have actually played with the concept of with the environment, and we never would have been concerned as today if we would have actually lived with the concept of cyclic nature of any technology or any nature that we have. We look at the electronic industry. Many of the countries in India or in Europe or in the developing world have laws related to electronic waste, but the way they are implemented, the way the companies or the humans actually are concerned about the electronic waste, I see that there is not more has to be done rather than only doing rule making, and we need to actually work around the implementation and awareness that is very important. I'm happy to see that during this COVID time, the government of India actually realized the importance of cyclic economy, and the 16th set of principles on cyclic economy, highest level. We as a ministry actually floated the first paper on a cyclic economy around IT and electronics, how we can achieve that. We have a stakeholder consultation and hope that with a consultative process, we will be able to come to some conclusion. The second important thing is that how that we talk about the SDGs, we talk about the sustainable goals, we talk about a clean environment, we talk about the environment which is healthy. But let's understand, there was something which was there which talked about a better world and sustenance together to be coexisting, because without a sustainable ecosystem around something which is very good also, it cannot coexist. So the 17 SDGs, rather than we thinking of pushing them back by few years because of the challenges that COVID has brought, we need to think that we need to accelerate the implementation of the sustainable SDGs. Previously, we thought of 2025, but at least by 2027, we should, each country should actually achieve that rather than pushing it to 2030. The last point I want to drive around is that the newer generation has actually beared the maximum brunt of the challenges. We as a generation, or we as a generation are are the biggest culprits of environment. And I think our earlier generations were also not that culprit, but they were equally culprit. But the present generation is actually very, very sensitive. I've seen a lot of startups, like when they start business in India and when they are thinking the environment, the sustenance of nature are the key concerns. Most of the electronic products are green products. They are aware of it. They talk about electronic waste management. And these youngsters, these startups who are the future generation entrepreneurs are aware of it, are sensitive around it. We need to create policies. We need to create subsidies which can actually allow them to do that, and we can compete with the world where environment has been actually destroyed because of economic reasons more, and because of short-term gains rather than thinking about long-term things. I think the time has come that this has to be taken seriously. The last point that this cannot be a national objective, because one nation thinking seriously cannot solve it. Everyone is interconnected in today's global world, and we need to think globally but react nationally on all these issues. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Garg, and absolutely resonating with your thoughts that for too long, humans have been exploiting and destroying the planet's ecosystem, and we must rather fundamentally rethink our relationship with the living world, the natural ecosystems. And talking about future generation entrepreneurs, early stage startups, I completely agree that how everyone is remarkably conscious and are taking steps in the direction of conserving environment and making the products ecosystem friendly. Talking about generation restoration, Gayatri, can we have your initial thoughts and a shared vision on this, please?
Thank you, Payal. Truly an honor to be here amongst this eminent panel. And there's been a lot to learn within the last, 30 minutes that we've been listening on to the gentleman speaking. In my capacity and position, I believe, as was mentioned, I think by Mr. Singh, that we have to work with technology in a capacity that is collaborative and it does not come in and disrupt. And rightly so said by Dr. Garg that the sustainable goals that have been set out, we need to work towards achieving them faster and not find excuses to push that deadline to further. I believe at the levels at which we are speaking, I'll probably take a step back and talk more so from an individual point of view of an individual in this generation at this age. What is it that I think we can do to be able to contribute to bring in some amount of change? Because at the end of the day, it's every drop that counts. We seldom realize that an action taken by an individual at even the most basic levels is in fact going to ripple the effect and bring in more people to support and join that initiative. So I think simple practices like reconsidering the diet that you follow, right? Going towards being more vegan and perhaps start off with being vegetarian. Simple tasks like cleaning up your digital waste that you're sitting on. Most of us tend not to realize that even the digital equipments that we use and that entire ecosystem pollutes our environment in its own way. So in fact, today Finolex is taking forward what they initiated last year, thanks to you, Payal, and we are back at raising awareness, collaborating with like-minded people and agencies to ensure that people are there, aware, and doing their bit to reduce their emissions from a digital standpoint. Going back to some of the startups that we were talking about briefly, it's quite interesting to see how there are certain industries which are really at the forefront and wanting to inculcate this entire concept of sustainability. And one such brand that comes to my mind, because I work with them closely, is One Less. It is a clothing brand that is entirely sustainable. They're working towards ensuring that their practices are best suited to the environment. And in fact, with every purchase, they're also planting a tree. So I think, individuals, institutions at their own level are doing their best in their best possible capacity. And I believe collaboration really has to be at the forefront at a time like this, when we realize that thanks to what we as humans have done over the years, today we are facing the brunt. All of us are, fighting the pandemic day in, day out. And I'm certain we wouldn't like for neither ourselves nor our future generations to be seeing more such events taking place. So the need of the hour is to be able to identify what one can do in their individual capacity. The simplest of things which we may think won't really make an impact, in fact, do make an impact. And then, of course, it comes up to the level of policy making, corporates coming together, and those in power in different positions, collaborating again, joining hands to make this change happen.
Thank you, Gayatri. And yes, the digital cleanup drive, which we kickstarted last year, was quite a success. And saying that, I'm chuffed to see that this is an initiative that has been carried on as well. And the most important thing is, number one, awareness, and number two, that we're actually thinking about the digital trash as one of the call to action for ecosystem restoration. So thank you, Gayatri. Yes, when we see young people at work and what they are doing, it gives us hope that we can reverse the devastating loss of ecosystem we have witnessed for so many years. Nevertheless, this can't be done alone, but we can do it together. And like everyone rightly said, it can be varied from policy making, technology, reform, or I would also say a simple task of picking out trash or recognizing what doesn't belong in the habitat, and coming together with your peers to be the decision makers and be the powerful voice that we can. And the Global Alliance works across countries and continents with champions at all levels to catalyze opportunities with the potential of a paradigm shift. So, Mr. Tripathi, coming back to you, we understand that the Global Alliance is building partnerships at all levels. It's garnering political support, mobilizing large-scale sustainable action within communities, leveraging private finance for public good, and at the same time replicating success on a planetary scale, which will help achieve the climate goals and all the 17 sustainable development goals by 2030. Also, as former head at the United Nations Environment Program, what, according to you, shall be a workable call to action on this transformation pathway of recreating and reimagining?
Well, I think we are not running short of great ideas. As has been mentioned today, and a lot of forums, you listen to these amazing and inspiring young entrepreneurs who have great ideas, but they get little support. I mean, of course, in the scheme of grand imagination, you always come across one or two that might have succeeded, but there are thousands that don't. And that is because we do not have an ecosystem that really encourages. I'll give you an example. About 5 years ago, I was trying to set up something called the Tropical Landscapes Finance Facility in Indonesia to garner private finance at mega scale to protect a 400,000 hectare rainforest, which is kind of the lungs of Asia, the same way the Amazons are in the Americas. And so in the course of that work, I had just left the UN in early 2016 to set this up outside the UN, before, of course, going back again 2 years later. I met about 13 different banks at their highest levels, CEOs or
the people that mattered at the top levels, the best banks in the world. Not one came forward to step up to the plate. They said, oh, it's a great idea. It's amazing. And here they were not talking to someone who was a startup young person. When I came to that, I had already headed the UN's Red Plus office, which was a serious program. And just for Indonesia, Norway had just offered $1 billion to protect their forests. And so I was heading that whole structure for the UN. And so somebody who had both the exposure and the passion to do something, and they knew that, and they wouldn't, because we understand finance in a very complicated way and in a very simple way, all at the same time. The simple way is input versus output. And we do not look at the stocks and flows in nature. That's not in the conversation. It is about, I put, say, 100 rupees in a bank, I get 6% interest, and so I'm making 6 rupees every year. That's how you think. What does that 100 rupee do for the planet? How does it destroy that? Because if we don't see a holistic picture, which is the concept of externalities, then we are basically fooling ourselves. And until you do that, you will not find solutions. Now, in this particular case, in Indonesia, finally one bank, BNP Paribas, came on board. They took a lot of risks. They helped raise the first 95 million in a $350 million project. And that project now employs directly and indirectly 50,000 people. Why do I mention this? Because if you do not have a compact with people, you are never going to succeed. We must keep it on the top of our mind that the climate change that we are talking about is anthropogenic. It is human-induced climate change. So if you don't work with it's not the tigers or the elephants or the pangolins or the orangutans that destroyed the forests. It's us. So if we do not create those win-win-win models for success, we will miss out on critical elements in that whole puzzle. And so you will have a very distorted picture. And that, of course, I left in 2018. That institution still thrives. Canada just this year put $23 million into that institution, hoping that they will create many more such things. And then we brought the idea to India as the Sustainable India Finance Facility. Our first partnership was in Andhra Pradesh, at that time under Chief Minister Naidu and now under Chief Minister Reddy. And the amazing thing is that even though there has been a political transition, hats off to Mr. Reddy that he sees this as something that is empowering of his people, his farmers, and especially women farmers. The work they do in Andhra Pradesh is absolutely staggering by any metric you use. You know, we the so-called intelligent and well-traveled experts are so afraid of risks. Every time we talk about doing something, you will have a room full of people that will tell you, oh, you know, we have to manage the risks and it is too risky, and you know, the money, we don't know if it will come back, it doesn't protect the principal, and what are the returns, and everybody wants 15% returns on their capital. This is absolutely nuts. Look at these women farmers in Andhra Pradesh. They live from one crop cycle to another, and their entire family, school, children, hospital, day-to-day, even the food on their table, everything depends on they succeeding at whatever it is they plant and they grow and they sell. And they are willing to change behavior. They are willing to switch from synthetic chemical farming to natural farming, which is something they had done for maybe 4 decades, 3 decades, depending on your age and what you've done. And now they have already 1 million farmers that have changed behavior. So it is possible. So anybody that tells me that it is not possible to bring back our biodiversity, bring back our ecosystems, or bring back Mother Nature, they're kidding themselves. It is certainly possible, but it is not possible by having only supply side conversations, which we are having now, most of the time, all over the place, whether it is the UN or outside the UN. What is the conversation? I used to be the UN representative on the board, the Global Board of UNEP Finance Initiative, which has 1,500 organizations. Pretty much everybody that matters is in that conversation. And what they're doing is amazing, but it's all supply side. So there's principles of responsible investment, responsible insurance, responsible banking, a net zero asset owners alliance. And these are all absolutely amazing conversations, very important. I'm not suggesting that they shouldn't happen, but they cannot happen just by themselves. And then we expect a miracle at the demand end. There is no demand. You can shift the financial system to be more responsive to green investments. But where are the ideas? Where are the projects? That will only happen if we get our hands dirty. You go down to the grassroots, you work with the champions, you identify them, you empower them, you let them lead. You stay in the background, but you're always there to hold them on if they fall off. So that is the business model of bringing back nature. And that will work. And that's what we're trying at the Global Alliance. We are working to set up a climate adaptation fund of $10 billion. That will be the world's largest climate adaptation fund by hundreds of miles. I mean, currently you don't even have anything in the $100 million scale, because you really need to put, the whole conversation has been about mitigation. You know, your CO2 versus my CO2. How do you talk to the Prime Minister of India when India has a per capita carbon footprint of 1.9 tons? Now listen, the global average is 4 tons per capita. India is at 1.9 tons. The best experts in the industry tell us that 2.1 tons is the ideal footprint. That's where we all should be as humanity. So how do you sell it to the Prime Minister of India or the leaders in the opposition or the entire political class that while it is okay for the United States to have 16 tons per capita, India should be doing more because it has 1.9 tons per capita? You cannot sell that unless a politician is suicidal. So if you want to get out of business of politics, then you do these things. In politics, what matters is that you have to stay in business, like in any business. And that is about winning the hearts and minds of people. So you cannot sell this. But if it was about lives, livelihoods, the contaminated water we drink, or the toxic air we breathe, or the completely collapsing ecosystems around us, the vanishing groundwater, the stressed out populations, the public health crisis that India and other countries have. So if it was anchored in adaptation, if it was about our waters, about our air, about our landscapes, then people listen because it affects them directly. For the last 3 decades, we haven't talked much about biodiversity or adaptation. The moment we do that, then we will have people's attention. Then we will build these action coalitions where people come together. The moment, you take these inspiring examples around India and the rest of the world, tomorrow you go stand on the beach somewhere, you start picking up single-use plastic, which is a menace of epic proportions. You will certainly have 10 people around you picking the plastic as well. That's how you spur action, not about talking about how much CO2 plastic emits. Doesn't work for people because most people don't understand the mumbo jumbo of technical stuff. Not that it doesn't matter, it certainly does, but it cannot be the only thing that matters because then it doesn't work. We already have 3 decades of engagement since the Rio Conventions in 1992, and it hasn't worked. So we really need to start thinking in terms of people and what impacts people, what affects them on a daily basis. And that, when that changes, you need money to make things happen. Talk is cheap, and that money has to come in the scale of trillions. When countries like India want to act, instead of moralizing and sermonizing, the world really needs to stand up and create these win-win examples of private finance for public good. And that's what we have set out to achieve. And I must tell you that in the last few weeks that I have been at the helm of the Global Alliance, it has been an absolutely inspiring experience with a great team. and amazing ideas to work with. Especially our partners are absolutely brilliant, and we're looking forward to making the difference in the next 10 years.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Tripathi. And it was shockingly disturbing for me to read how, I was reading an article that stated how every 3 seconds, the world loses in a forest to cover a football pitch. And over the last century, we have destroyed half of the wetlands. Talking about the gas emissions, the global greenhouse emissions have grown for 3 consecutive years, and the planet is one place for potential catastrophic climate change. Thank you for your thoughts there. Now, talking about technology, today's biggest environmental challenges include climate change, loss of biodiversity, like we said, Mr. Tripathi, which has been hardly spoken about. Water quality, and the list is endless. To address these changes, there is a need for custom solutions. If we talk about air quality monitoring, carbon footprint management, and air and water solution monitoring. Now, these are few applications where implementation of cutting-edge technologies such as artificial intelligence, IoT sensors, big data to reduce carbon footprint is dire. When we talk about customized solutions to address environmental issues, and I would say that these have been consciously developed by blue chips to early stage startups with massive rate of innovation and re-engineering. So, Dr. Garg, to you, how do you think shall India in these 10 years of generation restoration achieve the transformation pathway for recreating and reimagining this critical issue via technology?
I'll give you a very simple example, that the quality of water. As you know, India must one of the most in terms of the number. So what we to continue, just a brief add-on point to what Dr. Tripathi talked about, that we always talk about the absolute numbers when we talk about environment change and the harm to the nature. And that is the criteria on which the whole discussions around the climate change was taking place, and it took so much of time to come to some sort of negotiation. So having a population of 1.3 billion, if it is a crime, then that needs to be addressed, rather than because of the 1.3 billion population, or we as a country to be very large, have to bear the maximum brunt of the climate environment damage, rather than having a much more equitable contribution, which we always foresee. And what we saw as that each human has got a responsibility towards the environment, and each human, the amount of damage it does, has to contribute in a way that it needs to, rather than thinking in terms of the country. That is one point. Now, coming to the technology, we must be aware that India has been one of the most challenged countries in respect of providing the good quality and quantity of drinking water to our citizens. The Honorable Prime Minister, in his Independence Day speech in 2020, or rather coming to office in this term in 2019, decided and declared from the Independence Day speech that each individual in this country, each citizen, will get a good quality and quantity drinking water by 2024. A mammoth task, a mammoth mission, but when the head of the state talks about it, has to be done. We as the executive realized the target, and we went on a mission. And when we saw that monitoring the quality of water and purification of the water for making it drinkable in India, if we go by the existing technologies and existing solutions, then budgetary support required will be so humongous that it will be beyond the capacity of India to actually implement this. We ran a challenge. to ask our startup community, do you have a solution which is low cost, robust, and in accordance with Indian ecosystems? 148 startups came up with the idea. Took us a whole lot of challenge, and we are actually working with 5 in each 25 of our villages with different, because realize in India, the drinking water is not about only chlorine and it's about many, many different pollutants that go in different regions. And how do you solve that? And how do you actually have sensors for that, which are actually affordable and with the size of India? Understand the first level procurement will be 34,000 crores. That's the size of sensor procurement. So what I'm trying to say that if you have to do this, you have to find path-breaking solutions. And these path-breaking solutions are there with the new generation entrepreneurs that are emerging. But the challenge is that we need to come as a country, we need to come as a global nation that realize that adopt those technologies. Both the corporate and the government have to change their mindset and actually making them partners to the future journey. And that's what we are looking at. And that's what we are trying to change the procurement system to make them part. We have identified them. Now the challenge is how do we actually make them part of our journey to progress or growth? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Garg. Srijin, you've been at the helm of, innovative thought leaders in policy, education, environmental conversation, and most importantly, space, science, and technology. I remember we had this conversation about how at Homi Labs, which is an innovative educational platform for lifelong learning, I remember you stating quite strongly how environment ecosystems is what we have to invest in. Opportunity to educate younger generation on how ecosystems work, how we can care and minimize our impact most effectively by embedding education on study of ecosystem restoration. So yes, would be rather interesting to know your thoughts on this pathway of recreating, reimagining via education and technology.
See, Payal, when I was a student and when you were in school, perhaps you were in the same period, there used to be a period once in a week, and that was called, I think it was called EVS, Environmental Studies. Okay. Usually the teacher didn't come. Usually the students went out playing cricket and nobody bothered. So it was something which students would have categorized as a free period. There were no grades for it. There was one book for it, which is more like a fill in the blanks book, and which I don't think anybody bothered about. So if environment is so important and is such a important subject for somebody who was in school and who's today in school, why is environment study at a school level such an outlier subject, something which nobody really bothered about? So the problem begins there. So you see, we have something, there's too much of focus on Siksha, and in Hindi, Siksha means education. And there's very little focus on Talim, which is relevant knowledge. Education and knowledge are not the same things. Knowledge is when you use some form of information or some form of education into something which is meaningful for yourself, for your society, for your family, for your nation, and for the world. That is the true impact of any education. That should be the purpose of any education system, which is to create knowledge. Now, have we, and this is not just Indian problem, this is an across the world problem. And I think Dr. Tripathi was right when he said that, why do you think it's so difficult to bring world leaders together on an issue which we all know is our asteroid? Dinosaurs were destroyed by an asteroid. So this asteroid struck Earth and they evaporated. We see our asteroid. The asteroid is right there. It's just heading towards us. The numbers are there. The initial results are there. Now you mentioned about a football field worth of forest vanishing every 3 seconds. In the last 2 decades, the hottest months, hottest years ever recorded, I think 17 out of 20 were in the previous 2 decades. We also know that there have been, you talked about rising carbon levels, carbon dioxide levels. And that's not the only problem. We have rising methane levels. We have whatever else we have. That's all there. I mean, you can see it. When I was in school, you could drink water from basically a garden hose. I have basically drunk water from a garden hose pipe. Now, Gayatri would have never done it. Gayatri will never do it, because in 1990s, a device came which is called Zero B, okay, zero bacteria. And they said you have to put it in a tap and then switch on the water, and the water is filtered by the force of the water. So you don't need electrical connection or anything. It's a small device. I don't think it would cost more than $100 or $200 back then in 1990s. In today's term, maybe 500 rupees. And then in late 1990s or early 2000s came something called the AquaGuard. Now, this is a 3-cylinder kind of a device, and I don't know how many of us have seen it, because we've sort of moved away from that generation as well. But this thing has a very, very morose sort of deathly music with which water comes out. And you have to plug it to electrical connection. And then they said, no, this is not good enough. Now you have to go to a RO system, a reverse osmosis. Now it's got 7 cylinders. It plugs into a big power sort of a connection. It throws away 4 times the water it gives you. As if as if it's not water which is coming in your tap, it's petroleum, and you're basically refining it. So you're no longer purifying water or cleaning water, you are refining water. And we see this, and we accept it. And it doesn't bother us. And that bothers me. Because that is where I think education system is failing to create the right awareness. Why do we learn to accept all this? There's no economics to it. I mean, an RO costs me much more than a garden pipe used to. I mean, that was free. A Zero B was cheaper than an RO. So there's no economics to it at a consumer level. The only economics to it is at a manufacturer level. And the problem is that we have submitted to a society which does not question, which has learned to accept, whatever is going wrong is blamed back on us. We are told, and I'm in no way supporting that you should, not have great taps which can go all watertight. But people are told that it's your tap which is leaking, and that's why there is no water. And that, while maybe true for 1% of the shortage of water, is definitely not true for all the water. We are not polluting water as consumers. And if you need evidence for it, just look what happened last year when all the industry shut down suddenly. The Ganga River, which we had poured tens of thousands of crores perhaps to just clean Ganga, cleaned on itself. What does this show? Who is to blame? And who is a person who's being just made a scapegoat? I suppose we are the ones who are being made a scapegoat. So I think it's important for us to completely renew and refresh the education system. Now, we've already spoken about technology. Nothing will move until we realize what is important and what is just a noise. And there is a lot of noise in this system. And to clear this noise, we need the right knowledge. And unfortunately, our education system is there to build good industrial employees, but not socially aware citizens. We don't do that. It's almost counterproductive. Well-educated, questioning citizens are not good slaves. They question, right? So now what we need to do is we are trying to create some model through various initiatives. I mean, Homi Lab is one initiative. Kalam Center, we also do it across a board of people. We have educated about 2.5 lakh students on technology which could build better world. We have the world's largest library network by a private initiative. I mean, let alone the government, but we are operating close to about 550 libraries now, which are all for free. And they just tell people on how to become more knowledgeable and not just educated. So there are these initiatives which we run. And I think it's extremely important for us to see the entire thing in perspective. And the reason I suppose you mentioned space is because, when you think big, when you think from outside. So in one of the lectures, my very good friend, and I don't know, I shouldn't call him just a friend because he's much elder to me, Wing Commander Rakesh Sharma. Now, if you remember in your textbooks, Wing Commander Rakesh Sharma was the first Indian in space. In fact, he's the only Indian in space to have carried the tricolor into the space. Nobody else has done so far. I asked him, one day that, what did you see from space? So he said something beautiful, and that recording is there on my Facebook if somebody wants to look it up. I said that, look, I saw back then, there was a fire in Myanmar, in Burma, right? And that smoke, it was a forest fire. And that smoke was rising upwards, funneling outwards, and going with the spin of the earth all over the Indian Ocean. And I could see it dissipating right over Africa. And that is how it is. And when Dr. Tripathi was talking about how this is one problem, it's not India's problem, it's not Pakistan's problem, it's not China's problem. Because the smoke rising out of China will affect your lungs. The dirty water which Pakistan would produce perhaps would damage Iran maybe, or us, we don't know. So I think the golden words is what my teacher and somebody I spent years and years advising and working with said. And his name is Dr. Kalam, Dr. APJ Abdul Kalam. And he said that, the day, especially the younger people, this is true for anybody who's young and watching it. If you're a school-going kid, if you're a college-going child, or not child, but a youngster, or you are anyways young at heart and young at mind, doesn't matter the age. See, the thing is that the day the global youth community decides that who's your enemy, is your enemy across the border? Is your enemy 5 countries across your border or in another continent? Is your traditional rival your enemy? Is your enemy the person who does not share the same belief in terms of who's God? The person with different religion or different language? Is that your enemy? If you open conflicts on that, exactly what Dr. Tripathi is saying will happen. We will never have consensus. We can have meetings after meetings, and you will never be able to convince anyone to bite the bullet. Everybody will negotiate, and that's what will happen. Because we see each other as rivals on all issues. That's exactly the reason why the pandemic spread. China could shut down its own borders with Wuhan, but did not shut down the borders of other countries with Wuhan. Because I want to take care of my problem, but not of Italy's problem. And lo and behold, we had an outbreak all across the world. The same will apply for environment. And for this to be realized into something, we have to realize what Dr. Kalam said were 3 enemies which our shared humanitarian goals should identify. And our shared humanitarian goals should identify poverty as an enemy. It hampers everything. You can't tell a poor farmer in India, do not flood your fields without giving him an economically viable alternative. The same is happening when we are asking farmers in Punjab to stop burning parali. They say that, oh, this is your economic issues being pumped onto me. So poverty is number 1 problem. Illiteracy is number 2 problem. And illiteracy is not in how many classes you've attained, but what knowledge you have and what you do with it. And the third common problem would be disease and pollution. And they're linked to each other. That's why I put it into one. So disease, we are seeing a problem, and pollution and disease are linked problems. If you think that COVID is a big killer, yes, COVID has killed 3.5 million people across the world, and it's the biggest pandemic ever. Think about this. 2 million Indians die every year because of indoor air pollution. That's a pandemic of every year. So we have to see disease and pollution as a common bucket. We have to see illiteracy as a problem, and we have to see poverty as a problem. And I think all these 3 challenges we can fight with technology with the right spirit. If we create inclusive technology, and we have been, that was my job for 7 years, to create inclusive technology with the former president of India. We have to create them, and there are plenty of them. And I don't even think we need to stick to India for that. I think it's a global challenge which has to be solved by a global population. And the solution originating out of India could solve a problem in Iran, and that's fine. That's absolutely okay. Israel was the country which pioneered the whole industry of sequestering water from atmosphere. Is going all over the world. That's fine. Internet was invented by the American army. The armed forces did it, their own army. it connects the entire world. It's fine. We are using it right now. Right now, so that's these global challenges have to make us realize that education should be truly global and help everybody come together across distances of language, character, or religion, and anything else, and identify common problems. That's what we're trying to do. And I think if we are able to educate children all across the world that environment is your common shared challenge and your common shared opportunity, I don't think the divisions which generations have inherited upon the next generation, those differences can be overcome only when the next generation, the children of the world, the youngsters of the world are given the right knowledge that who is your foe, what is your opportunity, and how you can work together, right? So that's what we do. And of course, Homi Lab is one of the initiatives, as you said. We also do initiatives in different languages sometimes. It's important to do that. And I think technology becomes a huge sort of a way to reach out to people at a low cost at the user end. And that has something which we are trying to do, right? Thank you.
Thank you, Srijan. Talking about education, environment, I would now like to talk about a little bit about CSR. So Finolex Industries and Mukul Mother Foundation are working towards the environment conservation via several initiatives. One of them is water conservation. And it is remarkable to see large industries and businesses like yourselves, Gayatri, are implementing ecosystem restoration. So Gayatri, could you tell us what is the progression of your CSR initiative in the coming decade, which we called Generation Restoration?
Thank you, Payal. Rightly so, as has been said by the other panelists before I've spoken, is that this generation that comes in, and I think it's a shared responsibility between you, me, and our peers as to how best we can, in our capacity, again, as individuals and as institutions, come forth to bring about marginal change, which will, soon culminate into being widespread change. I find from a manufacturing perspective, it is challenging for us to be, able to be in a position to overnight change the systems and processes that we have in place, which I think needless to say, anything out there has its pros and cons, right? And unfortunately, you can't do away with certain processes, certain products, certain technologies that are in use. It is going to take time, and one is going to expect support from the government through policies so that it enables smooth transition for the better of the planet, of the wider population, as well as the industry that's being proactive to bring in that change. But what I think really helps to facilitate immediate change is CSR, and ever since that's come into play as a law in 2014, I believe it's helped many more corporates and individuals to be more aware, alert, and do their bit. I can speak for Finolex, and even much before this act came into picture, my late grandfather did ensure that these principles were at the forefront for us as a business, as an industry. And the fact of the matter remains is that doing your bit for the society in which you are surviving, that is supporting your businesses, is a must. It goes without saying, right? And we've simply extended his thoughts and his principles. And today we do that much more formally under the principles of CSR. There are 16 mandates that have been laid out by the government of India, and I'm happy to say that Finolex, through its CSR partner, Mukul Mother Foundation, covers 13 out of these 16 verticals. We're also aligned to, if I'm not mistaken, 6 of the 17 Sustainable Development Goals as set out by the United Nations. So I believe that there are corporates like us and many more who are doing their bit in their own capacity, in their own verticals, to bring about a change. And just going back to what we're doing for the environment in our own little way, and I say little because I think there's so much to be done. Whatever any one of us can do at the end of the day will be just a speck in the ocean. So yes, there has been focus in Maharashtra and across the districts in the state on desilting existing reservoirs, cleaning reservoirs and doubling their storage capacity, tree plantation that we've been doing. We support the beach cleanup drive in Ratnagiri, where we have one of our plants there. All our processes, including our jetty in Ratnagiri, complies with the regulations that have been set out. We do our regular audits to ensure that we are in line, and yes, there is a certain amount of pollution we all emit, irrespective of being part of an industry and a manufacturing setup or not. But what we do is ensure that there is awareness across the board, that we are conscious. And I think just touching upon what Mr. Singh had to say in terms of education, I vehemently agree that it is awareness that is going to really help us to bring about a change across different levels and different parts of the country and the world. Because we need to go back and think the farmer who probably does not understand the repercussions of certain actions that he's taking. It is unintentional at the end of the day, right? He's going to do what best he can to feed himself, his own family, and be able to survive. So if we're able to break down the importance of understanding EVS, like Mr. Singh rightly said, I remember bunking that lecture too, because it was never given enough and due importance. And I hope that will happen in time to come, wherein we break down that that knowledge to us, to such a easy way of absorbing and understanding that those who may not be literate and may not be able to read and write, but at least through means of visuals or any other mediums of communication, we are actually able to drive home the message of how each one of us is responsible for what we are facing. We also have the capacity to bring about a change. And that's when I think, like Dr. Tripathi said, we will be doing more of acting, getting our hands dirty rather than just speaking. So that's a thought that I'd like to leave us all with, that if we're able to come together and create avenues and platforms where we can educate better in simpler, simplistic manners and drive home this message, I'm sure we're going to be able to see credible change come our way. Thank you.
Thank you, Gayatri. Well, that wouldn't be your parting thought, because we have a very interesting question from the audience, which is directed to you. I'll come back to it later. Mr. Tripathi, your parting thoughts. I understand the Global Alliance enables system scale transformation by leveraging private finance for public good. So your thoughts before you leave for generation restoration, opportunities to scale public and or private sector driven restoration?
Well, I think the argument to be made is this, that the global GDP at a macro level is primarily 70% in the private sector and 30% in the public sector. And public sector is primarily government, rent, rates, and taxes, and what have you. And then, that those resources, then governments are normally an income redistribution arrangement where the government takes away a little bit of the money from everybody and then puts it where the most pressing needs are, so that we have a balanced society and harmonious growth that takes everybody along. That's pretty much, in a nutshell, what the public economy looks like. But then, you add on to that the challenge of not just of a generation, of a species, that's us, and then you hope somehow desperately that that 30% is going to solve a problem that is perhaps 10 times of that 100%. So that's not going to work, and it hasn't. In the last 30 years, we've been talking about it ad nauseum as to who's going to put up the money for who all will do what, and nobody has really put up any money. If you look at the three big mechanisms that exist now, the Global Environmental Facility, GEF, the Green Climate Fund, and you can add to that the Climate Investment Fund. So if you add all three of them, they have garnered roughly about $30 billion in the last 3 decades. Of course, not each one has been there for 3 decades. The GEF has been there, but then the others came much later. But in cumulative terms, that's only $30 billion. Whereas in the Paris Agreement, a certain set of countries in the world promised to the rest of the world that we're going to put up $100 billion every year by 2020, so that all of us can, solve this problem together. That hasn't happened. And I don't think that is going to happen. and I'm not being pessimistic, I'm just being realistic. Because if in 30 years you have produced $30 billion, why should anyone believe that in every year you're going to put $100 billion from 2020 onwards? Because 2020 has come and gone. Nobody has seen that kind of money. And that is not because people don't want to do this, because nobody really understood when making these promises, where is the money going to come from and how is it going to get redistributed across the planet. But if you look at the private sector, if you create these win-win examples, normally investments, all investments, as Gayatri would tell you, because she's comes from a very strong private sector background, that it's all about risk and rewards. What's the risk and what's the potential reward? And of course, we can all agree that the rewards can be also seen in terms of investments in nature and the stocks and flows in nature. But normally what happens is that somebody has a great idea and then you start producing things hoping that somebody would buy. Or you have resources, there's a mine, somebody puts money. Okay, if I take out what's inside, then I can sell it to somebody, and then this is the projection, this is the storehouse of wealth, and this is how I'm going to do it. But when it's nature, it's not that simple. It doesn't happen in 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, 5 years. If you're investing in a forest, you need to invest in 15-year money. That's simply not available in the markets. And the risks are such that any one actor or two actor or even 5 actors coming together, it doesn't work. So it has to be a partnership of governments, which is not going to, governments don't need to put money. They just need to be the benevolent overseer of things, regulation, policy, and all those interventions. Then you need the financial institutions who need to get to those investors. And trust me, there are millions of those investors. If you just take the pension funds of the world, take the top 300 pension funds, they manage $18 trillion in assets. And they all want small returns. Pension funds are very happy, or sovereign wealth funds are very happy if they get a 2 to 3% return with their capital protected. So that's what we need to do. We need to get to where the pot of money is that actually is patient capital, that doesn't mind making low returns as long as the principal is safe, and no principal is safe unless Mother Earth is safe. So that is the argument to make on one hand. On the other hand, find champions at the grassroots, work with them to build on their ideas. Bring in, that's what we're doing at the Global Alliance. We don't do anything in terms of, if you're a skeptic, you'll say, oh, what do you do really? And I would actually be with you. Honestly, I do nothing. What we do is we are a catalyst. We do not receive a penny from anybody. We do not together actors around the table, work with them very diligently in chiseling out the idea of how it should work or how it might work, how it can work. Michelangelo was once asked by an admiring supporter or a fan that how do you make these statues so full of life from these blocks of lifeless stone? And his answer was that you got it wrong. These amazing statues are already inside the lifeless stone that you call it. I just chisel away the unnecessary parts, and then that's how they come to life. So that's exactly what we try to do at the Global Alliance. The avoidable complications, you take them away by building a partnership, and suddenly what is seemingly lifeless and impossible becomes an amazing possibility as an amazing example of human ingenuity and collaboration. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Tripathi, and once again appreciate you joining us at the early hours from New York, and truly appreciate your stupendous remarks, which really catalyzes the virtuous partnerships of governments, international organizations, earth champions, what I would call, and global investors, on how they all come to, how you all bring them together to tackle the world's most pressing challenges. So thank you once again, and stay safe. Srijan.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Srijan, your parting thoughts on what we call the next 10 years of generation restoration and the opportunities to, have this awesome private and public sector driven restoration.
Well, I think good that you're saying private and public sector, because both are equally important. Governments will have to lay out a path which is worth assimilating, which is something which is absorbable. Because sometimes the thought becomes extremely radical. People would not endorse to ideas which make no economic sense. You cannot ask people to do insanely economically insane things, because everyone is, after all, managing their own self-economics, and one has to understand that. And that's where the government has to play a significant role in making the system such that green products or green technologies are something which is assimilated at a cost-efficient manner. A simple example to that would be what in India we did with solar power. And that is another, there's a book called Target 3 Billion, which I had written with Dr. Kalam, and we had studied extensively on how India assimilated solar power. Initially, the solar power used to be upwards of 20 rupees per unit. And then Gujarat, in fact, one of the pioneer states which began this policy and which was later adopted across India, was they simply said that the solar power would be 2% of the total purchase which the state electricity board would do would be taken from solar power. That created a market, and that initial cost of that was semi-subsidized in a way. And that spurred the solar industry to the point today when the solar industry, generation cost of solar industry in India is almost, in some states actually less, in some states comparable to the things like coal or things like oil power. So you can, as a government, you can play a very aggressive and active role of creating a systemic reform in which you can breed technology which would eventually take over the current, say, non-green technology. For that, I think the government needs far more innovation. I think we need to create systemic platforms to create markets. Since we have somebody from the startup space here as well, I worked with a lot of startups. We operated perhaps world's largest technology university is called Dr. APJ Abdul Kalam Technical University, and I operated the startup and innovation cell over there across 4 lakh students. And one clear observation was that people need markets. I don't think today's startup world has the conducive reach to a market. We have to work together to create a market for things which are environmentally sustainable and yet make economic sense for the end user customer. So that is something I think which we need to do at a governmental level. Private sector needs to create entrepreneurship within corporations, within large companies. We need to create spaces where employees could contribute with new ideas, which could make the world, your market, your customer, your employees, your supply chain, all that could be made better, could be made more efficient, and yet more sustainable. That, I think, could be done in many, many large private companies. And overall, what we could do as a consumer is to be more knowledgeable. For example, there are some, you see the price of everything and the value of nothing sometimes, because everything is judged based on, buying something for 600 rupees versus something for 800 rupees. That's the only barometer which we have in terms of judging, two goods, whether one is more expensive or less. I think we need to add a few more parameters from our knowledge, or I think even the products themselves could voluntarily do it in terms of how much water, for example, is used. There's a particular brand of phone which is very popular, which uses 2.5 times more water than its nearest competitor to make a single phone. And I'll not name the brand of it, but if you're smart, you'll get the idea. So, how do you know that? Nobody knows it. I think that's where we need to bring accountability in everything which we consume. Now, I'm not saying that make it more expensive or bar it or anything, but I think just creating the knowledge that, look, this phone uses 2.5 times less water than this phone. It could be a branding strategy. Let it be known. People may choose based on it. People may not choose based on it. People may have objective decisions which may include this as a variable or not. It's their choice. So I think that is extremely important to create more awareness into whatever you're consuming, what is the true cost of it. And that will only happen if we are creating the right educational tools to reach out with the right information, and which is also changing because many a times things will alter. So we need a concentrated environment education approach, which does not just suit our children, but also people in general. So as I think Gayatri was saying, in terms of how do you create tools which are understandable to somebody who doesn't even read that well? I think, so that's where, pictorial books, comics. So we have released, I think, about half a dozen comics on water conservation all across India in 5 different languages. So, those kind of comics can play a big role. Movies could play a big role. I think cinema stars could play a big role. A simple experiment we were doing were to just take every movie which comes in Bollywood and do an environmental and a social audit on it. So we said, does it promote good culture? Let's have a score. Does it promote good environmental practice? Let's have a score. People who are, these celebrities who are in cinema or otherwise, they're highly influential. They can actually change a lot of things. So why don't we start saying which is the most environment friendly movie in India, which gave the best message in environment? Why don't we do that? I mean, why doesn't the environment ministry do that? Just do an audit. Which one? Let people promote it. Maybe somebody will start promoting movies of that kind. So, you could use culture as a huge tool to reach out to those people who you can't reach out at school. And that culture tool is extremely powerful. So we've been trying to do something of that sort, but I hope, the government could take it in a bigger role, or some bigger corporation could take it in a bigger role. All that idea and interjection of knowledge and wisdom is there. We just need to implement it. The willpower is where we lack, right? Okay. So thank you for having me here, Payal. Wonderful time I had. Thank you to all the fellow panelists as well. Take care.
Thank you, Srijan, and truly sort of resonating with encouraging awareness for environmental protection. Gayatri, to you for the parting thoughts, and would like to know how technology and innovation for generation restoration, as an industry leader like yourselves, what are your thoughts? And let's say, a quick snippet of the plan for the next decade.
Thank you, Payal. I think coming in from a different generation to the rest of our panelists, I'm walking away with a lot of food for thought, to be very honest with you. And I think it's great for us to be able to understand and be aware that, the young blood has perhaps the energy to go out there and make that change happen, but it cannot happen without the good fortune of being surrounded by the experienced individuals like we've had on our panel today, and learn from them and have them guide us through, because they've seen many more suns, and it's a great guiding light to have such individuals and institutions there to support you. So I think for us to be working more closely, for us to perhaps create these think tanks and cells where we have more conversation, and hopefully those conversations don't stop within those 4 rooms. It's actually something that one can implement. And I think what SP said as his parting statement on the accountability and awareness, I truly resonate with that. I believe the more we're able to let an individual know what his or her consumption is leading to, it's going to help you be more aware and then take better educated decisions. But from a Finolex and Mukul Madhav's standpoint, I'd like to say that there are a couple of initiatives that we're taking which are currently under wraps, and I will not be able to share much about that on a public platform today. But needless to say, we are aware of the ESGs that are in place. We see certain industries taking bigger and faster steps. For example, what we see happening in the automobile sector. And we are aware, we are already thinking, we are already working towards certain initiatives, which we will, hopefully see them come to light very soon. But that apart, like I mentioned to you, for a manufacturing setup, I believe that it's not that easy to overnight change your systems, your practices. You do need support by and large from the government on certain policies to enable that transition to happen more smoothly, where it is beneficial for the industry, for the public at large, and for the government as well. And meanwhile, I think the avenue of CSR is really doing a great job in helping us to constantly remind ourselves of how privileged we are to, be living on a planet where we get all the natural resources that one requires to sustain their livelihood. And thanks to the very innovative minds around and across the world, we're seeing something new come our way every day, which I think essentially also increases our, our gap, our needs, right? We're so privileged to be having so many choices and options now that I think it comes to a point where we need to start limiting what we think is definitely essential, what is the need of the hour, and in that manner be a lot more conscientious in the steps that we take at an individual level, at a corporate level, and do the best that we can to preserve, protect, and take care of our environment.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Gayatri. And enlightening thoughts, like you said, that very subtly, that you are a different generation than the panelist. Good comeback that you've learned a lot from the panel. But yes, yours is the generation, like Mr. Tripathi also said, and Dr. Garg added on, that is suffering the most and therefore rather sensitive to bring about the change. Thank you so much for your parting thoughts. And thank you, audience, for being here today and watching our lovely panel on World Environment Day and their thoughts. And I would like to leave by saying that we need to act upon many things. We need to slash greenhouse gas emissions by nearly half by 2030, which is the call to action for generation restoration. And this is to hold global warming below 2% and avoid its most dangerous impact. We can't meet the goal without restoring ecosystems and their carbon stores. Ambitious ecosystem restoration and decarbonization of national economies do go hand in hand. And by halting and reversing the degradation of lands and oceans, we can prevent the loss of 1 million endangered species. Therefore, restoration is the key to prosperity and well-being of people. Vibrant ecosystems provide benefits from food and water to health, security, that our growing population needs today and will do so in the future. Ours must be the legacy for good. We must be the fighters, the warriors for the planet, firmly making sure we are on the right side of the history, championing environmental causes by inspiring others to care for nature. On World Environment Day 2021, let's make it a day to count, a day we begin the positive change. And yes, we can't do this alone. However, together we can. Thank you, everyone. Have a good evening and stay safe.
Have you ever seen time fly? Watch it slip through your fingers like a cloud passing by. Too slow to notice it leaving, too fast to make it stop. All we've known is to destroy like it's breathing. The pitter-patter of raindrops match the sounds of clocks counting down. Tick, tick. How lucky we are to live. We are a fraction of a second in Earth's lifetime, yet she is our only lifeline. Resilient, we stand on our own 2 feet. I'll tell you, reimagining the future has never tasted so sweet. Like nectar to a bee, honey to a home. No one can do this alone. Tick. The promise of restoration lives within us. We see her in the hues of the youth, and she's asking you, what will you stand for? Now is the time for our regeneration.